So let's take us through the shop, Adam.
All right. So basically, shop is always a bit of a mess. So you just have to kind of forgive that.
That's understandable.
I walk into people's shops sometimes that are incredibly neat and clean, and I'm always incredibly jealous. But they also usually have a lot more space than I do. One of the nice things about making mostly long, thin things is you really don't need width in your space. So,
Right.
I'm working a lot of stuff kind of this way. But, some of the, down here we've got some basic lumber. Some of it's already been cut a few times, some of it hasn't. But generally, if I'm making a laminated weapon like a bow or jo, tombow, these kinds of things, then you're going to be starting with these kind of big pieces like this. And then they'll get put on this table saw and they'll get planed, and you'll end up with laminations like this. So, and I'm using a lot of different kinds of wood, which is fun. I'm trying to use exclusively wood that will hold up to contact. So there's a certain limit, there's a certain minimum density, weight, crushing strength, all these kinds of things that these woods have that other woods, even other hardwoods, don't necessarily.
Okay.
So, hickory, paduk, Purple Heart, ipe. There's probably a few others in here. I think one of these is this is Jatoba. Most of these are South American. That tends to be where a lot of this stuff comes from. I don't use a lot of oak. The traditional sort of Japanese bow is white oak. Is it white oak, I think?
White or red?
Red. But
Yeah.
that's actually a different tree over there than it is over here. It's really not the same wood.
Yeah.
So, you get this kind of interesting thing where people think they're getting the real deal, and it's really a different weapon. So I haven't used a lot of oak. I like hickory a lot. And there's other makers in the country that are using a lot of hickory because it's just got a good kind of quality about it.
You use this wood. Do you have a favorite for a particular type of weapon that you're making?
I don't know that I have a favorite. Yeah, I probably do. I really like the Jatoba a lot. It's a medium tone. So a lot of times, if I'm making a weapon, let's say, I'm thinking about the aesthetics as well, because that's kind of the angle that I'm taking with the weapons I'm making. That's sort of, I'm hoping, what sets mine apart. So if I'm making something laminated, I'm going to be putting sort of something medium tone on the outside, maybe flashy on the inside, medium tone, and then you're getting this kind of boom, 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 boom. And this is a rough idea. You'll see some finished products in a minute, but it gives you an idea of kind of how I'm putting things together. So generally there's a lot of planing, and ironically, if you look at the width of this blade, I'm losing about half the wood I buy because on these thin laminations, sometimes I'm losing a good bit. So, you're trying to figure out how to moderate that and work with that. And then once they're done, then there's a gluing process. Then they're back on this saw to kind of get run a few more times. They get made square and then usually octagonal. When I started at that point, everything was hand carved from an octagon. And it took a lot of time. Wow. And it was fine. I mean, they were nice looking, but hand carving presented two problems. It was time consuming, so I really couldn't make very many very fast because it was physically demanding. And then there was a lot of opportunity with these kinds of woods to make mistakes because the way the wood grain, it's so dense, and it has something called interlocking grain. So you'll be carving and you'll get tear out and a whole big piece, and then you've got to take the whole weapon down, or you got to take that area down now to kind of smooth that out, or you'll have splinters and things. So at some point, I switched over to doing a lot of my rounding on a router. I still am not using a lathe. Most of the big commercial makers use lathes, and some of them, even the lathes are automated. They just put the wood on, and the knife just does a tracks, and they'll even track for tapered and all these kinds of things. They've got all this stuff set up, and it's real slick. And honestly, I have a small lathe right there, and I do some of my littlest weapons like shizukumbo and sometimes tambo I'll do on the lathe. But this process has worked really well for me. And so sometimes I'll start this way. Then inevitably I'm still hand carving, but it's smaller amounts of hand carving. You're cleaning up areas, you're balancing it a little bit. And if there's taper, sometimes I'm tapering with another set of routers that I've got set up, a jig and all this kind of stuff. But sometimes I'm just getting out there with there's my hand plane. It was sitting around here. Literally, this is my baby right here. It's like, okay, So a lot of that, but it just kind of depends on the weapon. Yep. If I'm working on an eku that has more hand carving, it just has to. There's areas it's too hard to figure out how to create that shape with a machine, and that's fine. I mean, so what ends up happening is the weapons, they're all flawed, which is great. And I mean that in the best of ways. Like, they all have personality. There's simply not one you're ever going to find. Every now and I'll get one that's pretty perfect, and you're like, it almost feels weird because I just like the life that a flawed weapon has. And flawed's really the wrong word, but they just have, they might not be perfectly round, or there's little things. So usually I'm working on them, and then because I work with the weapons myself, picking them up, playing around with them, feeling the balance point, finding out how they feel, go back to work a little more. And then the final stages is a whole series of grades of sandpaper. I sand and sand and sand and sand and sand and sand and sand, and then I oil and oil and oil, and then they're done. So, but
what about the care the care that the owner should give after the fact?
Yeah, I mean, you'll have different people a lot of that really depends on the environment. Right. So, if the weapon is in an environment where it's going to dry out really badly and get really brittle, if it's left in the sun, if it's a really dry climate, these kinds of things. If it's going through real radical changes, like any wood, if I left the weapon outside in the humidity all day one day, and the next day was back in the house in AC, low humidity, and then was back and forth, all of that's hard on anything native wood, right? So wood's a living thing, so it's changing. So, how you store it is important. You don't want it to warp, so keeping it straight, not leaning it. I think oiling it once or twice a year, depending on how much you're using it, is important. I tell people to sand it real lightly, and then there's a couple different kinds of oils that are good. I use tung oil, but some people like lemon oil, some people like unboiled linseed oil. So there's kind of different things that work. If you're really using your weapons a lot, your own oils are getting in there a lot. So, but I don't put any finishes on them. Like, I don't put any. The tung oil, it has a little finish in it, which is a little sheen, but I don't put like any varnish or anything. Okay. So. And that works pretty well for me. So
not a very large shop, but
no,
getting it done.
No, and what's interesting is everything starts out long like this, and at some point you start running into problems. You get pieces that you'll cut, and you'll end up with, let's say, let's see if a good example. You'll end up with this, right? So. It's starting to become hard to know what to use this on. It's hard to put this into a weapon because now it's only about 1 1/8 inch, and if I had to take off any more, it'd be down to 1 inch. And so I'm constantly trying to come up with, you can see the piles of wood over there and all this. And so I have some designs that start to incorporate these that are a little more decorative, and I'm always looking for new ideas on ways to kind of because eventually I'd love to use all this wood. But you even get these really neat cut-offs. You get how can I throw that away? That's really cool, right? But there's really nothing I can do with it. I could. It's too decorative at this point for a weapon. Maybe I'll have to come up with another thing to make that I glue it down, and I don't know, but see, it's falling apart as we speak. But anyway, so you end up with a lot of wood. So.
Yeah, I can imagine. Looks
Yeah.
good though.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very, very cool. How long does it take, hours wise, if you could put a number on it, or maybe you have exact, to make a 6-foot bow?
Well,
I guess it depends on the different type of wood and laminates and how many layers, huh?
that's part of it, and it is hard for me to put an exact number on it, and I'm not trying to be coy, but I'm usually working on multiple pieces. So if I'm going to be efficient, when I go to start ripping wood, I'm not going to rip wood for one bow. I'm going to rip wood for a bunch of weapons at the same time, because I'm setting up the saw and all that, and that takes time. So, I'm guessing probably if things went really fast and really well, you might have 4 hours in something. You might have 6 to 8 in something that gives you more trouble or is a little more complicated, and so it just kind of depends.
What is typically the easiest weapon to make?
Probably Tombow. And mainly because it's just easier to work with shorter pieces of wood. So, you might be doing all the same things you're doing for a long piece, but there's less concern about warping, or there's less processes you have to worry about. Because sometimes you'll glue up a whole thing and you get it all the way. In fact, not even that. Sometimes I will get down to sanding and I'll find flaw in the piece. I mean, it's just like, how did I miss that all this time? I'm working with this wood, but it's like it doesn't necessarily present itself real obviously. And Tombow, there's just less wood to have that issue. So sometimes with the warping though, and this is one of the advantages of lamination that I like. So I like lamination for a couple reasons. A, it's pretty. I mean, it's pretty. I went to art school, so what am I going to do? I got to do something artsy. But we've all heard these stories, right? Of the guy in the dojo who does a really strong strike, and the bow snaps in half, and a piece flies across the room and misses Sensei's head by an inch. Right? Okay, we've all heard these stories. Can't happen with a laminated bow, because there's simply no grain that's running all the way through the piece. Even if one part of it started to crack, it's going to be supported by the others, and it's almost like plywood. I mean, plywood, you're actually running opposite, but even by the fact that there's no continuous grain, that can't happen.
I see.
Okay, so that's one. Two, warping is less of an issue, because I can actually look at the wood prior to putting it together, see which way it wants to warp, and then push those things together so that they actually fight each other and they straighten each other out.
I see.
So I can create straighter weapons.
Okay.
They're probably overall, they might be a tough stiffer than maybe other kinds of solid weapons. That might be and for some people that might be a pro or con. I don't know. These are just some of the advantages I like about the wood.
What is the typical weight of a bow, of a 6-foot bow?
My bows are probably about 2.5 pounds.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know what the typical weight is. That's a great question. I'm guessing a little bit lighter, maybe. Again, it depends on the wood you're using.
Yeah, it depends on the wood. Because the ones I held the other day that you made, they were lighter than I thought they were going to be.
Right.
Actually.
So, one of those was particularly lighter. Yes, that straight one with the hickory.
Yep.
Yes. That one is lighter for some reason. And but the tapered one that I had there was a little bit, that's probably more typical the weight of mine.
Yep. And I think, what I'll say typical, because a lot of people, especially if they buy weapons in Okinawa, train in Okinawa, they're going to base things off of Shirado.
Right. Sure.
They're going to go, right?
It's the gold standard.
Yep. And then when it comes to, if you wanted to do tournaments, you're going to be, depending on the tournament, you may have to weigh and measure.
Interesting.
So I think like 900 grams was the requirement.
Oh, interesting.
Minimum of 900, I believe, for the male bow at the tournament last year. I cannot remember what the Sai were, which we're not making metal weapons, but...
I've made some Kama. I haven't made Sai. I made Kama. Yeah, so that's really interesting because, and I can understand them setting a minimum because they don't want this whole kind of toothpick bow thing going on, and I get that.
I think for the women it was 800 grams.
Yeah. So I'd have to do the math on that and figure out what that is. I'm sure mine are more than that, but how much more is the question.
Well, being more is okay.
Right. you know.
For tournaments.
I actually just made a bow and shipped it off to a client. I can't remember where they are, but Mom got in touch with me, and she wanted a bow for her son to compete with. And she wanted one of mine, but he was going to compete. And she's like, "Can you make it in 1.5 pounds?" And I'm like, and I actually went ahead and just made a couple things because I wasn't sure. And I'm like, oh, well, these are some of the lighter woods I use. I think nothing was even close. Like I couldn't get it under like pound, almost 2 pounds. Like 2 pounds was kind of minimum. So I went out and I bought some lighter wood, and I said, I can. I said, I'm not going to recommend this for contact, but this thing will move. It's going to be light. And sure enough, I made a 1.5 pound bow for him, and as far as I know, they were happy. But
very good.
Yeah.
So shipping in the United States, international.
Yep.
People
U.S. mail. I've sent weapons to Scandinavia, England. A number to Europe. I've sent them to Okinawa. Yeah. I had a U.S. serviceman order stuff from me for Okinawa. Sent them to Hawaii and all over the United States.
We'll take a look at some of Adam's weapons. He's kindly brought into his dining room here. So take us through the display if you don't mind.
Okay, well, we've got everything from the long weapons down to the shortest being like Chizukumbo, which for those aren't familiar with are similar in some respects to Teku, but they fit in the palm of the hand, tie on with a string, all this kind of motion. They're real cool. Mm-hmm. I've been making these, like this pair is an example of stuff I did on my lathe. So these went through that whole process we talked about of getting cut and glued, but then they got finished on the lathe. Okay. Nunchaku, which I love making. I joke that the hardest part is stringing them. So there's those. Tombo, a lot of Okinawan systems, I don't know that they work with Tombo, but Oyata, whose style I study, does. And so whether you're working single stick or double stick, I've always made a lot of Tombo. And every now and then I'll find a wood that's just so pretty that I don't bother with the lamination. I just kind of, because that thing is...
What kind of wood is that?
I don't even remember now. Which is terrible to say that, but...
it is beautiful.
Yeah. I'll just find these kind of one-off pieces sometimes. I'll also make some of these designs octagonal, which a lot of people like a lot. I do this with Bo and Joe as well. And, you get a whole nother action. Mm-hmm. The way it fits in your hand, the way it moves, the kind of edges you get when you start hitting other people with it. Mm-hmm. All that stuff is kind of interesting. Of course, eku. This is kind of a standard eku for me, this size. And then this is a commission I'm making for a 4-foot child. So I've been trying to figure out the balance point and how to, because everything changes as soon as it gets shorter. A standard eku that I'm used to working with, you kind of got a balance point that's pretty much right here. Kind of right where your hand, right where your top hand is when you're working the weapon. So I had to kind of figure out how long a handle and how long a paddle portion I would need for this. So this is in progress. It's not done yet, but it's coming. And then we've got Joe and Bo here. Some different designs. This is pretty standard for me. Well, no, I'm sorry. That's a straight one, but probably where's my this one, which is tapered. Triple lamination, or I'm sorry, 5 lamination. That's pretty standard for me. And then occasionally I'll be playing with new design ideas. This is a new design idea here. So it's got a hole.
So drilled and plugged with it.
And plugged so that you know. I always have this concept that, people go to the dojo and they leave their weapons there and they know which one's theirs this way, right? So you don't have to put your name on it. Yeah. Oh, mine's the one with 1 dot. Mine's the one with 2. Yeah. Or I had this funny idea about people ordering them. It's like, I'm giving this to my new student who's getting his nidan. He needs 2 for his nidan. So I have something silly like that. But And then you get kind of crazy stuff. This piece started out round, and I had trouble with it, and it ended up oval. And that's going to be the kind of thing where somebody's going to come along and say, that to me feels great. And it's interesting because actually, as a user myself, I probably wouldn't purchase this because it's telling me what it wants to do too much. It's like I can't make it do what I want. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
But let's say someone who studies Aikido and does a lot of work with Bokken. This would mirror Bokken really nicely because you've got an edge. So now you've got you know where your hands are, you know where your edge is. So and so it's just a matter of preference. So I never feel like anything is off the table. Everything's got potential for somebody. Even this one is reverse taper. I've done this in Joe and Bo. So it's thinner in the middle, fatter in the ends. So one of the things that's nice about this is, if you're used to working with Joe, you slide your hands end to end a lot. And now, so the weapon's telling you where to stop because you literally get sucked right in there. So everything, you know where you are. And you start to spin it, the weight's out on the ends, boom, it goes really fast all by itself. So that's kind of an interesting variation that are fun. So.
Do you have one particular weapon that's ordered more than most?
Probably bow. Yeah, I mean, and I think almost, there's just, I pretty much, I can't really keep them. They don't stay around.
And if someone makes a special request, I see 5 layers there.
Right.
I see 3.
Right.
They have the option, I want 3, I want 4, I want 5, or is it kind of...
There's 2 ways this is working now. I got a good problem to have, but I had a lot of people specialing order things. And one of the things that's challenging with special orders is that now you're making a very specific thing. So for instance, if you made something and it had to be round, this would now be a dud, right? They're not going to accept this. So a lot of times when I make special orders, I'll just go ahead and make 2 sets of whatever they want because A, if I make a mistake, I've got a backup, and B, if it comes out well, I have another one to sell someone else. But I'm increasingly sort of trying to move away from actually doing special orders and simply kind of create a waiting list. So if there's something specific you're interested in, and we get you on the waiting list for it, and the next one that comes along that's close, how do you like that? But that gives me a little more freedom and flexibility, because a lot of times what people don't understand is if they might request a specific wood and I go to the lumberyard, they don't have a good piece. It's not like it's always just available, but there's something else beautiful that I really could work with, but they didn't ask for that, So what's nice, we got a visitor. What's nice is to have that flexibility to work with the best wood I can work with at any given time. So that's kind of how I'm approaching it. I've been doing that very successfully with Eku. They've had a lot of interest in Eku, and rather than try to make one Eku for one person, I simply said, okay, you're on the list. Right. Next one that comes along and you can pass, and you can wait for the next one after that. But that sort of works better for my way of working. It gives me a little more freedom.
See?
So.
Very good. Well,
now, having said that, I have done special orders, and I probably will again. But